Usually I'll go live on the dot 11, but the last time we had a bit of an issue. So we're going
Yes.
to do this. We're going to do this now, 4 minutes ahead just to make sure
We're
everybody's
just like
on.
super keen to just get into this conversation for World Soil Day.
Yes, and of course, I'm very excited to talk about it. I guess this is the last show. I'm in
Mhm.
green because it's Christmas, and it's about the soil, although that should be brown.
Yeah.
But we want to talk about this, and I
I
was actually, huh? It was actually celebrated on December. What do you call it? Uh, the day was on December 5th. World Soil Day was
fifth.
on December
Yes.
5th, right? And it's something
Yeah.
that's just been brought to attention, and it's such a important thing, right? I mean, when we think of soil, I mean, unfortunately in Malaysia, you probably think about the soil when the sudden news of the landslide, right? But
Yeah.
I guess in
Awful.
this context, we're talking about how it affects the environment, right? When we talk about planting and how the soil needs to be protected, because if the soil isn't rich, right, it's where you grow your plants, your food, and if you're not getting the right
Absolutely.
nutrients, right?
No, yeah. Well, soil
So
degradation, over the years, this is something, Frida, when we were looking into this, it's interesting because you don't realize how important soil is for everything, for life, you know, for flowers, which I wore this top specifically,
right, okay,
for
okay.
food, all these things, which, if the soil doesn't rest, it loses its nutrients. Therefore, our food that we're eating is not as good for us, and already that's a different conversation, but we're already eating microplastics in our
Right,
fish and
right,
meat and everything, so we really do rely so much on nutrients from vegetables and
right.
from the land.
So the supplements I take, they're actually from the world's largest what do you call it, organic farm in the world, which is Amway. Very proud, Neutralize. So I mean, like, I'm very conscious about, like, with the
Yeah.
supplements that I take are from the right sources and all that. But how, what else, right? I mean, I don't think, like, if I'm tapawing food as much as possible, like, I do look out
Mm.
for it, right? But in your everyday life, how often do we do that?
Yeah.
Anyway, so we'll just keep on chatting until 11, a little bit more. But just for those of you who just joined us, Causeway Conversations, Rianne is out in Singapore and I'm out here in Malaysia, although she's not in Singapore at the moment.
No,
She's
today
she's
today we're just across the highway together in Kuala Lumpur today for back for the holidays. So
Right. And every month we try to cover something that touches on topic of sustainability. And so, there's so many areas of sustainability, right? From gender equality issues
yeah,
to, what was it that we had this conversation on mangroves a couple of months
yes.
ago. So just
World
different
Indigenous Day as well. All
day, right?
different you know issues, which really it's a very interesting conversation and should be brought to the forefront.
Right, and then of course
Yeah.
we Indigenous Day we had Alena Murang, right? So it's very
Yes.
good, right? Because I got all these resources from my home state, right? So the guest
Yeah.
that we're about to reveal later has probably spent more time in my state than I have, not on the ground but in the ground, and we'll talk about the work that he and his co-founders are doing. But I think he's the one that's always there all the time, and we probably won't get into this. But I had a chat with him recently. He's actually an actuarist. Okay, that,
Mm.
that the actress turned farmer, so he's probably doing the calculations in a different way right now. So anyway, maybe what we can
Well,
do is we can get started. It's already
yes, it's
11.
11 o'clock, so let's get started. Well, I mean, Frida, did you know that there are more living organisms in a table of soil than people on Earth? And we just found out this year that there are 8 billion people, so that's pretty much a
Right,
huge number. But
right.
as we did mention a little earlier, that over the last 70 years, the levels of vitamins and nutrients in soil has drastically decreased. But what World Soil Day is held annually on the 5th of December to focus attention on the importance of healthy soil and to advocate for sustainable management.
Right. And then just on that point you just mentioned as well, right? When you think about how in the last 70 years, the level of vitamins and nutrients has decreased, right? And how people say, well, I just have enough nutrients for my food and vegetables. Well, maybe not, right? So World
Yeah.
Soil Day is held annually on 5th December to focus attention on the importance of healthy soil and to advocate for its sustainable management. So this year's campaign, called Soils Where Food Begins, aims to raise awareness of the importance of maintaining healthy ecosystems and human human well-being by addressing the challenges in soil management, increasing soil awareness, encouraging societies to improve soil health. So someone who knows this really close to the ground is Chan Zijiang, co-founder and CFO of Langit Collective slash Farmer. I'm going to get him on right now. Yay, I've got him on. And of course,
Hi,
he
hi, good morning.
and to make it simple,
Good morning.
we'll call him Zila. Okay. So anyway, Langi Collective, based out of Sarawak, promotes unique and heirloom agriculture produced by smallholder farmers from East Malaysia to larger markets. And heirloom is such an interesting word, right? Okay, but before we get into the topic at hand, right? What was the reason, Z, you and your co-founders wanted to start Langi Collective, and what's been the response to the heirloom produce?
All right. I'll have to start like maybe in 2013. That was when where me and my co-founders we met. So we were actually colleagues working for a non-profit back then. And this particular non-profit, we were actually doing basic infrastructure projects in rural villages, like out in Sabah and Sarawak mainly. Mainly gravity-fed water systems. Like it's quite unthinkable that even in those years and even until now, there are still villages that don't have water supply, don't have road access, don't have electricity. So that was what we did, and within a short period of time, we did quite a number of projects. Like I think it was like maybe 20 odd, like in a span of like a year and a half. So we were cycling through a lot of these villages, and um, from having no water to having water supply, I mean, that's an improvement. But that kind of question that was always at the back of our minds were like, okay, so what's next then? Like, are all these villages going to be like, you know, empty in the next 5 10 years when the elderly pass on, and then the younger generation goes to town, and um but then we also see this lost generation of young people, like, so those who can excel in their studies, they probably you know, become urbanites, but there are
Right,
some who just don't catch on, and they go back to the villages and they don't know what to do with themselves. So we thought maybe there can be an alternative model for rural villages in Malaysia, or at least in these
right,
parts of the world, right?
right,
And one thing that we saw was actually the produce that they have. So a lot of these farmers are, these communities are subsistence, so they plant for their own consumption.
mm,
And in 2015, we thought that, hey, why don't we try? Because we were in these parts of rural Sarawak called Lawas in the highlands, and they plant loads of rice, like different types of rice. We were quite amazed that, hey, actually, there's so many different types of rice. It's not just the only type that you get from Sekinchan or from Kedah. And until
right,
then, you know, our understanding of rice was based on where it's produced. And it was in this place where we learned that, oh, actually, there are varieties of rice. And that's how we come across this term heirloom rice.
right,
And that idea sort of sparked that we brought it over to KL, and we packaged it into like a tiny jute bag and sold it as a Christmas gift, and people loved it.
right,
So, and that was how we really started. And what we were really trying to do was actually to come up with an alternative development model for rural villages
mm,
through agricultural produce, and to be more specific, from their heirloom produce. I mean, for the urbanites, they might know heirloom tomatoes. That's probably more common. But when you bring out heirloom rice,
rice.
people be
Uh,
like, people
Yeah.
like totally blank, right? And it was a very difficult sell, in the sense that we had to educate the market, or bring some awareness to the market about the existence of
mm,
such a product, right?
right.
So yeah.
Okay, I'm just okay. So as a Sarakian, right? And when I read about it, like it was news to me. Okay, so that's one. The other
Yeah.
thing is also, if anybody have any comments or whatever, just feel free, and then of course we'll get Z to answer it. But the other thing that you just mentioned, right, about like how the older generation are planting, and then the young, and then what happens after that. So I guess by what you're doing, you're also trying to get the younger generation to stay on, because it is profitable to stay on. Are you
Yep.
seeing, I know you've been there since 2013, are you seeing that happening already, that the young are
No.
choosing to, no,
No,
oh,
Oh.
unfortunately, not yet. I mean,
yet, not yet.
not enough, unfortunately. So we
Mm.
are seeing a few younger people who came back, and they were probably part of the Great Resignation, and they came
Oh.
back, and and they came
Like
back to
myself.
Yes.
they came back to the village, and they started seeing that maybe there's a chance. And
Okay.
the thing is, these things don't happen so quickly,
Yeah.
and
Right, right,
especially with communities that are so remote,
right.
they don't subscribe to concepts. They believe in what they see. So it's not about, I have this great big idea. I go in and do a pitch to this community of 300. And then, the next day, oh, we are all signing up and we're all coming back, going to be farmers. And no, it's not going to
Yay.
happen, right? So it's going to
Yeah.
be a step-by-step thing. But
Right.
you mentioned about we are putting up a mill, some form of a more formal kind of infrastructure
Mm.
uh, in the village, and we will be employing the younger folks and maybe some of the older folks to work together, and we will probably be the first private employer that actually pays KWSP and SOXO in the
Okay.
village,
Oh,
Okay.
apart from the government. Yeah, so
yeah.
we are
Right.
seeing some younger
Right.
people coming back. Yeah,
So
Right.
hopefully
Okay.
that will encourage
yeah,
more
yeah,
people to
for
come
sure.
and,
Mm.
come back to the villages and
Yeah,
everything like that.
yeah,
And I have to raise my hands. Unfortunately, I was one of these people also that only knew about heirloom tomatoes. That's the one
Right.
thing that I had heard about, but not so much heirloom rice. But
yeah.
yeah, at least you're getting the word out there.
Mm. Mm.
But then, as we mentioned in the introduction, soil nutrient loss is actually recognized as a global issue, like a critical problem for the world. So I just wanted to get behind, like, how does soil actually lose its nutrients and what can be done to improve it?
So
Let
if you,
let the
yep.
actuarist explain himself.
I'm
Yeah.
wondering. So isn't it ironic? Like when I'm an actuary and I'm explaining about soil nutrient loss, like, but well, it's something that we learned along the way. So when we started working
Right.
with these communities of farmers, but I did not have any agriculture background, so I had to do a lot of reading and research on my own. And this is when I got back to my secondary school biology class, and we were talking about soil, and this is when I started working in soil, in the soil, literally, because I was
Mm.
planting and
Yeah.
harvesting with the farmers. And I have to say, I was actually quite surprised when I found out that actually our community, we are so fortunate that we don't
Mm.
have this problem. We don't
Mm.
have this soil nutrient loss because
Mm.
the farmers are planting in such a sustainable way. I mean,
Mm.
I did not know when I started, but when I started talking to people and researching about food production and agriculture outside, then, oh, wow, this is a big problem. But hey, how come we don't have this problem in the kampong?
Mm.
Yeah, you've
And
got the best model in place to prevent
Right.
yeah,
that, I guess.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's so ironic because then I traced it back. There's actually a historical part of it where you start with the Green Revolution in the mid 20th century. So that's when this chemical process of producing nitrogen based fertilizer came
Mm.
to become mainstream, and that's sort of how it kicked up this whole what we would probably term as conventional farming today.
Right.
And this whole paradigm is probably of why we have this soil nutrient loss today.
Right.
So
Mm.
what basically happened with that process was we could now produce nitrogen-based fertilizers en masse,
Mm.
and it was singled out to be the limiting nutrient because basically to grow plants, like you need a lot of different things, but it was singled out that nitrogen is the compound that you really need, and now they
Right.
could produce these
Right.
en masse, cheap, and then really really quickly, and it's sort of like our plants can be planted on steroids now, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
Mm.
yeah, but the problem with this, yeah, sorry, Rian.
No, I just had a very quick question. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. No.
No,
Yeah.
no.
No, because of what you said. Is organics the answer, do you think? Because, if we're talking about pesticides and all of these things, and chemicals, do you think that organics is something that, could improve soil health overall in the long term?
I think organic is a start, but it's
Mm.
definitely not the final answer. So
Right.
so so the organic conversation, it's a spark for people to start thinking about it, right? But
Mm.
Mm.
and I would also like to point out that organic today and maybe organic before the Green Revolution, it's very different, right? Because the whole paradigm has changed. And when you
Mm.
have
Yeah.
farmers who have subscribed to this for generations, maybe two, three generations since the 1950s, it's very difficult to go back to that form of organic. It's
Right.
you can't
Right.
undo certain things. Like you have given someone something, like for example, a community that does not have electricity, and so they
Mm.
never had electrical appliances. But when
Yeah.
electricity now is given to them, so they
Mm.
start buying your fridge, your TV, and whatnot, and then one day you say, no, I'm
Mm.
taking back electricity, and you go back to the way you are. No, that's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah, so organic is a good start, but what actually happens from going back to that green revolution and with nitrogen is, now you produce it cheap, you produce it by huge amounts, so you just pump your crops with these
Mm.
fertilizers, but there is just so much that can be taken up by this your crops,
Mm.
and the rest of it is actually leached into the soil, and then into your waterways, and then into
Right.
your atmosphere. So this is sort of like a foie gras duck, right? So you're
Mm.
force feeding it so much, and in a
Yeah.
way, conventional food today is being produced. You can think of them as being unhealthy, obese plants.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
Okay.
can think about it that
Okay.
way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my next question, I think you probably answered it already. Because my question was when soil nutrients in excess actually spread to environment and contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. That's one thing, right? And so and is that what happens as well in this case? And I've got a question here from Sean Joseph, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Is that
Yeah,
the case? Yeah.
it is absolutely the case. So
Mm.
about only 50% of this nitrogen-based fertilizers are being absorbed by plants, right? The
Right.
other 50%
Wow.
are being released into the into the atmosphere in the form of
Right.
nitrous oxide. And
Right.
nitrous oxide is probably not so popular or famous as our carbon dioxide, which is our common
Right.
greenhouse gas, right? But
Mm.
nitrous oxide is
Mm.
so potent, it's 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide, right? So
Wow.
go
Yeah.
figure.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's not just the cow fart, right? It's not just the cow fart methane. You're talking about nitrous oxide too, and this nobody in this whole greenhouse gas and climate change, global warming thing is talking about this. This
Right.
is
Yeah.
like
Okay, before Rian gets to the next question, this question from Sean, it's not
hmm
really connected to our topic World Soil Day, but maybe there is, right? And it's
hmm
about the landslide question, right? And I
hmm
don't see how many landslides must occur on the same mountain hill before preventive measures are taken. So we can't, uh, what are they better ways to predict during construction development stage and get it done by whom? Is it the government or what, right? So it's not really connected to our topic, but at the same time, I'm just seeing like living in the highlands and all that, right? How are these things prevented in the first place? If
no
if
the
there is if there is a connection here, if there's no connection, it's okay. Because
hmm
this is not really our topic at the moment. Is all day is more about the nutrients and everything. But if there's a
hmm
connection, maybe you can give some light to this as well.
Well, the one thing is crop cover, right? So if you have like exposed soil, and when we have so much water and rain coming down, so there's nothing to stop it. So you think about it as a filter, right? You think about soil that has crop cover as having a filter. They have
Right,
like roots, micro roots, and water just doesn't flush down. It goes
right.
trickles down. So it's not like, so when it rains, you have this water is being sort of like diffused through the soil and
Mm,
through the roots. But when
mm,
you don't have so much, everything just washes away. So that's when
right,
you get this kinds
Mm.
of problem. I mean, yeah.
right, right.
I mean, that's in a
Mm.
very, very short way
Research.
to
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's go back to, the soil, because you said that even you had to learn it from scratch and you were kind
hmm
of exposed to the best sustainable practices in the kampong. So
hmm
I just kind of want to maybe dig a little deeper, to excuse the pun, to find out how, the differences between produce that's been grown sustainably in
hmm
comparison to, conventional farming. Maybe we touched on this with the,
hmm
all the chemical compounds, but
hmm
what are some of the challenges also which sustainable farmers face?
So I guess within this whole group, I mean, this whole terminology of sustainable farming, so it is a spectrum. So you on the one
Mm.
hand, so after you jump out from the conventional farming, you get into the organic farming, and then from there are a lot of other practices that actually is on a scale, right? So you
Mm,
can
Right,
go from
right.
organic farming can be still thought of as input farming. So you can
right,
just
Okay.
substitute all your chemical based inputs like your fertilizers or your pesticides. You could substitute them with organic options, and then you get organic farming, right?
Okay.
But
Okay.
just by doing that, you're ignoring, the elephant in the room. You're ignoring soil.
mm,
You're ignoring soil. You're doing the same thing, because you're
Yes.
still using soil as a medium. You're thinking of soil as a medium, and that's
Yeah.
where conventional
So
farming.
soil
Okay.
degradation can still occur with the organics as
Exactly,
well.
exactly,
Yeah.
Right.
exactly,
Right.
Mm.
exactly. So, and if you think of conventional farming and you push it towards a little bit to the extreme, you get a little bit of the no soil kind of farming that you get today, where
Right.
you have
Mm.
agriculture, like you have hydroponics, you have aquaponics,
Aquaponics. Yeah.
and you have all these things. So in effect, I have nothing against this technology, mind you. I mean, there are places where
Yes.
they are needed, right?
Yes.
But if you think about it, like when there's no soil and you substitute the well, basically water as a medium, water
Right.
doesn't carry as much nutrients or maybe any nutrients if you compare to
Mm.
the
The
soil.
soil.
So
Right.
what you're
Right.
feeding through is actually a cocktail that you decide for the plants that you're going to grow. So
Okay.
you,
Right.
and if I can draw an even
So you
more
have me.
a even more stark analogy, so if you think of a plant as a human, so now we humans, we know that we need carbohydrates, we need your protein, you need all this supplements. So will we come to a day where you don't eat any food and you just take tablets?
Mm. Okay.
So you think
Mm.
about that, and that's actually what this kind of agri technology, when it's being brought to the extreme, is actually doing, right? So you decide
Right.
on what they need and you just pump them with that. Yeah.
Right. Right. And I guess, as you mentioned, that's one aspect, but even the whole idea of sustainable farming, right? Finding the people to work it. So is sustainable farming tougher work than conventional farming in any way, or is just an issue that I guess the farming industry has in general?
I think it's going to be very difficult when you
Right.
start off with a wrong paradigm. So
Mm.
if you're like a conventional farmer and say, okay, you wake up one day, I'm going to be sustainable the next day, it's going to be tough.
Right.
It's going to be it's going to fail like really badly. But if you think about it, what do you mean by sustainable farming is when I'm actually going back to soil health. Like
Mm.
I have
Mm.
to reverse all
Mm.
these things. I have
Mm.
to work on soil and not just substituting what I'm doing with a quick fix, right? So this
Mm.
is going back to the soil and really understanding that soil itself is an organism, like it's a living
Mm.
organism.
Yes.
As you say,
Yes.
that it's a tablespoon of it has has more microbes than
Yeah.
the whole population on Earth,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. So, what do you think then needs to be done to encourage societies, governments, businesses to improve soil health? Then.
Mm.
So, well, this is going to be a really tough sell. So we are
Mm.
going down into consumer choices, and if you have
Mm.
someone like because talking about soil health, it's probably something that puts people off. Like, so what soil
Mm.
health? Like
Right.
what? How does it relate to me? Like, I work with CBD. I work on my computer. I don't touch soil at any time. Like soil is
Yeah.
dirty. It's like how I
Right.
see parents nowadays telling the kids, don't go and play there. Soil
Yeah.
is dirty. Soil is not dirty. Like if we can even
No.
get
Yeah.
this little notion out, it
Right.
helps. And the second thing is if anyone has any experience of growing themselves,
Right.
growing food, or even if gardening or like horticulture, and understanding soil,
Mm.
that's a first step that helps. And
Mm.
when you can compare like food that is grown from soil and grown from non-soil, you might see the non-soil food to be really nice, like it ticks all the aesthetic boxes.
Mm.
But if you really bring it down to blind tasting, to texture, to aroma, and to into cooked food, some more discerning palates can actually tell.
Right. Right.
Do you
And we
think?
actually get a lot of feedback of children being able to tell that. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, this year's World Soil Day, the actual campaign was called "Where Food Begins." Do you think,
Mm.
something like this campaign and World Soil Day can help promote these things? Maybe open people's eyes, like the
Yeah.
wider audience of people.
Well, if they have listened to this, then I would say that they would. But
Right.
but I,
Right.
I would I would also say that this conversation is not out in the open. Like we are
Right.
not talking about
Mm.
this enough in the
Right.
in the
Right.
public space. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask a Singapore question because the Singaporeans are always concerned about this, right? So, so only 1% of Singapore's land is used for conventional farming. Granted, it's a little piece of, it's a little tiny island, but it's a 30 by 30 campaign aims to improve food self-sufficiency through advances in technology. And you brought that up earlier. So how can old and new farming techniques work together to improve? So how can they work with Johor Bahru or wherever, so how can
So
I understand Singapore's concern, right? They don't
Mhm.
Yeah.
have the space, right? So
Mm.
and you talk about the other and where
The
it's necessary.
aquaponics and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
hydroponics,
yeah.
and we're seeing
Mhm,
a lot of like rooftop gardens sprouting
mhm,
up and things
Mm,
like
mhm,
that, and
mhm.
all these new techniques of
mm.
farming. So yeah,
Yep.
do you think that, like as Frida said, the new and the old can work together?
Well, definitely, and I think Singapore is, well, they have this 30 by 30 because they don't really have a choice, right? So
Yeah,
and with whatever that has happened, like that whole food security
Yeah.
thing became an issue. Well,
massively.
they
Yeah.
don't have, I would say, the liberty with soil, so they have to do something else. And rooftop gardens are actually a very good
Hmm.
option that they can do. Um, and I do know some farmers who are actually really soil experts who are actually doing rooftop gardens. And if you think about it, topsoil is only maybe 30 centimeters to at most a meter, like if you're really lucky, if you're in Indonesia having volcanic soil. But if you can have 30 centimeters of really good topsoil, you can grow really good crops. and
Ah,
and that can
Mm,
happen with rooftop soil. That can happen with rooftop soil.
right.
right.
But I think in Singapore, they are also talking about vertical farming, right?
Yes,
So
Yeah.
yes,
stacking things up so that you
yes,
you know you're more land efficient. And then
yes.
Mm,
when you're having control of the water, because they also don't
Yeah,
have enough water, right? So
yeah.
yes.
so if you have control of all these things can work for them. I mean, they have to come up with a very different narrative for themselves. Yeah. And
Right.
but
Mm,
I think the rest of us in the region, do we really need to get there? I mean,
Mm.
stacking up containers, and then you put in LED lights, and then you pump in water in through it, put in air conditioning, and then you'll be thinking it's like, and then they say that they're sustainable because they have like these huge solar panels on this
right.
containers. And then you think about it, like, the plants actually do get like sunlight directly. They don't really have
Why,
to go
why,
through a
why do
solar
we? Yeah,
panel and then
right,
convert
right.
electricity and then into LED, and then you get like, it's like,
Tech,
maybe
tech,
not. It's not.
so technology is great,
Yeah.
but you also know what you're working with. If you've got something that's
Mm,
you've got the resources, how are we leveraging on the most of the resources that we have, right? So
Yep.
like in Singapore is very situational, right? Singapore is a thing.
Exactly.
Malaysia
Exactly.
is so abundant, right?
Yes.
But are we using technology in the right way,
It's
right? With
but
the resources that we
the term that we use is appropriate technology. It's
have, right?
not that, the more advanced your technology is, the better it is. It's
Mm,
something, sometimes you don't need so much. Like, you just
mm,
need complementing technology. So for example, like in our village, like our soil is great, right? So
mm,
so I don't need all these inputs and stuff, but we still leverage on technology, like technology in maybe in terms of monitoring crops, right? So
right.
using drone technology to look at our crops, having an overview and planning of that, that's technology too. But
Right.
it does
yeah.
not mean that it must be something um, to tamper with the soil so much, because in our case, like, we're really fortunate, like our soil is great, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So before Rianne goes into a question about supply chain, though, if you have any questions for Z, you can just type it out and we'll get Z to address it. We'll do this for about another 5, 6 minutes because, as it is now that people are out and about, right? Uh, so just we try to keep it within 30 minutes. So anyway, yes, Rianne, you have a
But
question about supply
even
chain?
if anyone has a question afterwards, you can
Yes,
watch
yes,
it on repeat, and we'll
yes.
see the question. So
And,
do feel free, if we're not
and we'll
live,
and
still
we'll
to
hound
write a
Z
question.
about it. Yeah.
Yes, yes, we will. Yeah.
I'll be glad.
Yeah. So, as Frida said, we are coming to the end of 2022, and some global themes this year, unfortunately, where it's, supply chain issues and the cost of living crisis, maybe seen, well, especially in Singapore and Europe and all these places. So, if someone actually did want to start growing their own fruits and
Mhm.
vegetables in 2023, what would be your top tips?
Well, the first step of it is actually probably not so intuitive. The first step
Okay.
is actually to learn to forage. Before you start
Oh,
planting your own food, why spend so much energy when you can just get food around you? And mind
Right.
you, there
Right.
are foraging groups in Singapore, and there are food growing around us like all over the place. Like you may think that they are weeds, right? But that's
Mm,
because you don't know that they are edible. And this
right.
this is something that I learned even from my community, like recognizing things that can be eaten. I don't have to go to the market like for a month, and then I will
Mm,
still have plenty of food growing around me. I mean, that's
Right.
because I'm living in the village, but even back here in KL in Puchong, I can still forage. There
Right.
are still maybe not enough, like that
yeah.
so much that I can just skip going to the market altogether. But there are certain
It
things that
can
you can.
complement
Okay.
Yeah,
other
and
things.
Okay.
nobody
Yeah.
nobody's taking care of it, right? So
I want to
Mm.
see Rianne foraging in Singapore.
I mean, as soon as you said you can do it in Singapore, my interest peaked. I'm like, okay, I
Yeah,
need
I'm
to start
sure,
looking into
like
this.
the couple of things. And FYI, speaking of foraging, right? So Dewakan in Malaysia has been awarded the Michelin star,
mhm.
and a lot of their the menu is they're actually using the rice from Langit Collective.
Oh
So
Well, we are
wow.
very
they
fortunate.
so
Yeah.
there
Congratulations.
you
Yeah.
go. Not yeah, well, it's good rice. It's
Mhm,
proudly. I want to ask this as well because you were also awarded the DBS Foundation Social Impact Prize a couple of
mhm.
years ago. So these recognitions. What was it like to be recognized? I don't know if the prize money helped, right? And so these sort of things, right? How does it help Langit Collective?
Well, on the first level, it actually helps us psychologically, because
Mm,
we always feel like we are this shock syndrome group, like we're just doing
yeah.
things and then we're just, patting our own backs and but having some form of recognition actually helps that, actually some people do care about this kind of
Mm,
conversations
Yeah.
and that, our work actually means something. And, the thing is we are getting this recognition from Singapore. So we're still waiting for the Malaysian side, right? So kidding, but and maybe this thing like in Singapore, it's rare. They don't have
right.
the liberty of
Yeah.
vast amounts of
Yeah.
land, right? So
Yeah.
and this is something that probably as a Singapore, uh, I mean a Singapore enterprise will probably not be working on because they
Yeah.
would be on a different spectrum altogether. So we are really thankful to DBS and actually by extension to Singapore International Foundation who actually did see our work too. Yeah.
Mm, okay.
Yeah, I think in my experience from living in Singapore, I think it's like you mentioned, it's out of necessity. Really, these
Mm-hmm.
things of food, and especially during the pandemic, it was really brought to the attention of like, okay, even recently with Malaysian chickens and everything, how are we going to get food supply? And it's a
No
something that
chicken,
we
right? Oh
no
man.
chicken, no chicken rice, you guys. But yeah, no, for sure in Singapore, it's something that is definitely the 30 by 30 campaign is one that is out of necessity, and
Mm-hmm.
good to know that new and old techniques can work together.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I guess the final question is, what's next for Langit Collective for 2023?
Well, well, well. We are not entirely sure yet. Like we're having our
Mm,
final meeting and strategy planning like in a few days. But I think it's just a continuation of what we have been doing, right?
mm,
So we are not so reactive because we are in agriculture and it's a slow thing. It's a
right.
very slow thing. Like as I mentioned, maybe to Frida before,
Mm,
like we have our iteration is once a year. So we are not in
right.
tech where you have iteration of 30 in a day, like you just press a button. Like
Right.
we have one iteration a year. So things tend to happen a lot slower for us, but we are definitely trying to spread more in terms of being in the food scene, talking
Mm,
about food in general. I mean, rice is a conversation opener, but we're also talking about spices. We're also talking about soil, for example,
right.
and also growing methods, working with indigenous communities. So there are a lot of things that are on our plate, but which may not be immediately apparent on our website because that's
Right.
more of a consumer facing site.
Mm,
But we are actually really happy to be in all these talks. And before this, we were also with Dewakan's Kita Festival, talking about food,
mm,
talking about food production. So we are very open and we're looking forward to these kind of things when things are more open right now. And we're talking about Malaysia, but something in the region is something that we're hoping to do, like
right.
linking up with
Maybe
people
you should
from
start talking about foraging in Singapore. I think I would be first in line to
you
be
know there
attending that
are there are
tour.
groups that we know of that we can
Okay.
definitely put you through and
Right.
Yeah.
yeah, there are
Okay.
people who are foraging for their drinks, like for their cocktails in Singapore.
Right. And so that's just as you were going on, of course, with the soil, we haven't gone, this is just rice, right? Because they also
Mm-hmm.
have ginger and
Mm-hmm.
pepper,
Mm-hmm.
and the soil also affects that, right? And
Exactly.
the thing with rice though, with heirloom rice, you only harvest once a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
right, and that it's at the same time, and that's it, right?
Yep.
So you don't want to speed up the process, because then that would mean it's genetically modified. So that's the way it is.
you
There's
will
no
be you will be pushing the capacity of the soil to regenerate.
right,
So right now they harvest once a year, and they have such good harvest that they are not able to finish them for 3 years. I mean, it will feed them for 3 years. A single
right,
harvest will feed them for three
Wow.
years so then what's the point of, like, force feeding and planting
right,
more when it's in abundance right now? And this method that they
Absolutely.
have been using has been there for the past 70 years, and the buffaloes are doing the difficult work, like, going through the fields, eating up the stalks, and then pooping there, and then regenerating the soil. And all they have to do is just go and plant the next year, harvest, and then the buffalo does it the same. So they already have a circular
Yeah.
economy in that
me,
sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
right.
So no point in pushing that. Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
Z, thank you so much. I think we can go on and on, but
Yeah.
thank you for taking the time. And of course, if you can have any questions, even if you watch this later, do put it down. We've been speaking to Chan Zixiang, co-founder and CFO of Langit Collective. And of course, it's me, Frida Liu, and
And me, Rianne Lovell Boland.
wishing you all Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And we'll catch
Happy
up with you
New
all
Year
in the
in
new year.
January.
All
Yes.
right.
Thank you,
Take
Okay.
care.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.